1 year ago, I saw 1917 in theaters and said it was one of the most disappointing movies of last year. A year later, though, I bought the film on 4K and I recently rewatched it at home. How do I feel about the movie now? Stay tuned to find out. First and foremost, if you have not seen 1917 yet, I highly recommend you go check it out first and then come back and watch my video because there will be spoilers in this video. I will be going through the entirety of 1917 and analyzing this film from beginning to end. So watch the movie first, then come back and watch my review. If you guys were not aware, I did review 1917 a year ago, last January, and the title of that video was 1917, Why It's Disappointing. Some people who commented agreed with me entirely. Others thought I was an idiot, a bigot, and had no idea what cinema was. The truth is, when I watched 1917 in theaters a year ago, I could not get comfortable in my seat. I was restless. The movie doesn't utilize many cuts, or at least noticeable cuts, so therefore I was pretty bored watching this movie because it wasn't that intense throughout the majority of the film, since we have to stick around when these soldiers are just walking and talking. The movie doesn't cut to the more interesting scenes. However, this time around, I watched the movie at home on my 4K TV. I was very comfortable laying in my bed, and therefore I was able to marvel at the visual spectacle that is 1917. So let's get right into my analysis. The opening of 1917 is fine. It sets the rest of the movie up. You really can't do the opening few minutes any better than this. You meet Blake and Sco. They are given their mission. Then all they have to do is figure out how to get there. That's the opening 15 minutes of 1917. It's pretty plain and simple. In terms of structure, the whole movie is broken into stages. For instance, the first stage is when these two are moving through the trenches to get to the other side of the field where the Germans are hiding. Though I do have one complaint with this scene on rewatch. The first time you see this scene, it's nerve-wracking because you have no idea what lies on the other side of these trenches. But on rewatch, you know that there are no German soldiers on the other side of the field. So you don't feel the same intensity that you felt the first time around. And I was not at all tense watching the scene last night. If they added some German soldiers who fired at both Sco and Blake, I would have felt more tense. But because there are no German soldiers there, you know there is no danger ahead for our two main characters. Also on rewatch, I noticed far more cuts this time. The first time I watched the film, I had no idea when they were cutting, but watching from home, you can pretty much see when the cuts are being added in there, and it's really well done. These cuts are flawless. You have no clue how they do it. You have to be a professional in order to pull this off because the continuity is still great. The lighting is the same from one cut to the next. Their body movements are the same. I have no idea how they pulled these cuts off, and it was flawlessly done. So like I said, I was not the biggest fan of the trench sequence in the beginning of this movie, but I do really enjoy the sequence when they go in the bunker. This sequence is way more intense than the trench sequence because you feel like our characters are actually in danger. A rat gets caught in some tripwire, it's a booby trap, Sco is blinded by dust, and then Blake has to lead Sco out of this collapsing tunnel. You definitely feel like our characters could die at any moment in this scene. It's really intense. After this, our characters walk down a hill in a grass field. I did not like this scene at all the first time I watched it. I was begging for a cut. I was bored out of my mind because we were stuck with our characters having a 10-minute conversation. I wanted them to cut right to the chase. That never happened. This time around, however, I actually like the scene a lot more, and here's why. The best part about having no cuts is that we develop a real understanding of the landscape surrounding our characters. Watching this scene last night, I could feel wind hitting my face, grass touching my feet, I could smell the atmosphere. This is why having no cuts is a good thing in some movies. We even get a glimpse of character development here too when Sco says he didn't like being home. That's about as far as the film goes in terms of character development for Sco. As for Blake, all we know is that he has a brother. Then there is this crazy plane sequence where a plane crashes into a barn. I have no idea how they pulled this off, but the sequence looks beautiful. And Blake gets stabbed by this German soldier who he was trying to save. This scene is brutal. watching Blake get stabbed and seeing that blood just gush out, I felt the pain that Blake was feeling in that moment. I could see what Blake was seeing. I could feel what Blake was feeling. I could envision exactly what was going through Blake's head in that moment. I give so much credit to Dean Charles Chapman in this scene because he makes it feel really authentic. This actually comes off as a realistic death. And props to George Mackay for carrying this movie after Dean Charles Chapman's character is killed off. For an actor I had never heard of before seeing 1917, I can tell that this guy is going to be really famous someday in Hollywood, just based off his performance in 1917. Another sequence I disliked heavily when I saw this film a year ago in theaters was the truck sequence. This scene, in a way, is necessary so we don't have to deal with just George Mackay walking by himself for miles without anyone else to talk to. You need a truck there. He has other soldiers to talk to, and it's not like they don't try to keep it entertaining. The truck at some point gets stuck in the mud. Every soldier who's on the truck has to help push it out of the mud. The movie tries to keep it entertaining even when it's not the most entertaining sequence. And I believe we hear the beautiful theme song of 1917 for the first time after they get the truck out of the mud. So my opinion of the truck sequence has changed drastically since I saw it in theaters, because I at least know that they tried to keep it entertaining, and we do hear that beautiful theme for the first time in the truck sequence, so I don't hate it anymore at all. Shortly afterward, we are gifted with one of the best scenes in the movie, where Sko has to walk across a sunken bridge and is being shot at by a German soldier from a building. I think they knew they could not replicate the trench sequence here, because without Dean Charles Chapman, you would just have George Mackay walking slowly over top a bridge, not having any enemy across the way, and it would have been a pretty boring sequence just having one person. But I think my favorite scene in the entire movie by far is the town sequence. Sko is so close to reaching his destination, but first he has to move through this town that is held by German soldiers, and he has to do so very quietly so he does not get caught. This sequence is my favorite in the film for two reasons. One, it's obviously very intense. Sko is on the verge of being captured or even killed by these German soldiers, so he has to move through this town very quietly. And two, the score really stands out in the town sequence. It reminds me an awful lot of Sam Mendes' Bond films. Oh, and the cinematography. How could I not talk about the cinematography in this scene? All I have to say is that it's mind-blowing. I don't know how they did it. Right in this moment too, we start to finally feel something for Sko's character. Because when Sko is hiding, he meets a French woman and her baby. Well, it's not her baby, it's somebody else's baby, but she is taking care of it because I guess it was lost behind in the war. And Sko helps him out a little bit. He gives him some food, some milk, but then he has to leave. And this scene is tragic. That's the best way to describe it. You don't know what happens to this woman and her baby after Sko leaves. They could die, they could live. You don't know. It's a very sad scene. You wish Sko could stay behind and help, but you know he can't because he has to go save all of these British soldiers from annihilation. I do have another question pertaining to the scene where Sko jumps in the river. He goes down 2 waterfalls, and after the second waterfall, he comes up gasping for air from out of the water, and the film never makes it clear if Sko just floated for hours and eventually got to his destination, or if he just got there right away. The movie doesn't make it clear whether or not this is a time lapse. I wish they did, but they don't. They clearly wanted to make that one-shot take continuous, but it's quite annoying that we never figure out whether or not this is a time lapse. So Sko gets to his destination, but unfortunately for him, it's a race against time, and he has to get to the colonel before he sends out all waves of attack. No complaints about this scene whatsoever. It's gripping. He finally delivers the letter to Benedict Cumberbatch, who makes a cameo here telling him to call off the attack, but I have no idea how the heck the letter did not get soaked after all Sko had been through. Even just being in the river alone for that amount of time, the letter would have been ruined. There's no way this letter comes to Benedict Cumberbatch dry as it is. What I really like about this sequence is that Sko is not widely celebrated by the entire British army for what he did. I'm pretty sure one guy just says thank you and the rest of the army is completely unaware of Sko's journey. For Sko, it was hell. And the rest of the army is like, Who are you? What did you do? Okay, thanks, I guess. Even Benedict Cumberbatch is kind of an a-hole in this scene. He doesn't even say thank you. He's just like, get the F out of here. I guarantee you, if other writers or directors helmed this film, they probably would have had this huge celebration for Sko to make him feel like this big hero. But that's not what reality is. In real life, that would not happen. So 1917 does a really good job in making this scene in particular feel really authentic. Finally, Sko meets Blake's older brother, who is crushed to hear of his younger brother's death. Richard Madden gives a touching cameo in this scene. I'm sure Game of Thrones fans love this movie. I think the ending of 1917 is perfect. Not only do we get some emotion from Richard Madden as well as George Mackay on the screen, but we also hear the beautiful score, and George Mackay's character Sko finally gets to rest. He sits by the tree, he looks at pictures from his family. His character is so tired, he gets that well-deserved rest, and that's when the film cuts to black. Really, for me, I think my biggest problem with 1917 is the character development. Even though I got behind George Mackay's character after Dean Charles Chapman is killed, I still don't feel like there is nearly enough character development for his character. We see that he didn't enjoy being at home, and at the end of the film, he looks at some pictures. On the back of the one picture, it says, "Come home soon, we miss you," whatever. And the film doesn't really give much more context than that about his home life and the situation that Sko deals with at home. So I do wish we were given more backstory for both Blake and Sko in 1917. I would have cared about them more had we been given more character development for both of them. I forgot to mention that I think Blake's death is even too soon. He dies in the first 40 minutes. I think he should have lasted at least an hour in the film. The film is close to 2 hours, so for more than half of the film, it's just George Mackay and no Dean Charles Chapman. If I were to connect the past to the present, looking back at my first review of 1917, I think I was a little harsh on this film the first time around. I thought it was disappointing, overrated. I didn't like the film that much, really boring. But looking back, I mean, the movie is not that overrated at all. It's slightly overrated. This is not one of my favorite war films, but if I were to redo my top 10 films of 2019, this movie would not only be on the honorable mentions list, but I would go as far as to put this in my top 5 of best films of 2019. So my answer to this video's question of whether or not 1917 is still disappointing, no. I don't think this movie is disappointing. I think it's a really, really well-made war film, and it's one of the best of the last 10 years, hands down. But of course, guys, I want to hear all of your thoughts. Do you think 1917 is a great film, or do you still think it's kind of disappointing and overrated? I want to hear all of your thoughts down below in the comments section. And as always, guys, if you are new to my channel, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.